So altering the foundation alters the static bite. All right, so when we look at foundational occlusion, which is what we call this, the foundational occlusion is referenced from the fully seated condylar position, but let's build that. And first of all, I want you to think about the upper teeth. Upper teeth are fixed to the maxilla. And ultimately, everything is going to connect from the maxillary teeth back here to the glenoid fossa. This relationship, unless we change it, this is invariable, okay? It's totally invariable, okay? And then we have to add the lower teeth into the mix, and the lower teeth are fixed to the mandible. And ultimately, from the mandible to the articulating surface of the head of the condyle. So the lower teeth are fixed to this, but the two have to interrelate. They have to interrelate. And it's the disc that is actually a spacer. So the disc is a spacer that spaces the condyle away from the fossa. Let me animate that again. So when we put the condyle against the fossa, the disc is pushing the condyle away from the fossa. And that's what's establishing the vertical dimension of the structures of the joint. But we also have to take into account muscle posturing, okay? So this defines joint condition. Joint position beyond that is dictated by muscle. Make sense? So you could change the bite with spasm. That'll happen. If the muscle is pulling the condyle forward, that'll change the bite. But also, we overlook the anatomical part of it up in here inside the TM joint. So the occlusion is based upon attaining, the analysis of the occlusion is based upon attaining the seated condylar position. If you follow Dawson's functional occlusion, it's exactly the same thing. So the assessment is made from a seated condylar position, and functional occlusion and foundational occlusion kind of share common ground in that respect. But I want to take a look now at principle number 2. And principle number 2 is that joint damage causes interference to fully seated condylar position, okay? So if we took a look at a normal TM joint, okay, we're going to have a certain bite alignment. And with a normal TM joint, if you watch the animation, I'll go back and I'll do it again. When you watch the animation from fully seated condylar position, as we squeeze, we get a very slight slide forward. You see that? Okay, let me animate it again. So fully seated condyle, you bring the back teeth together. Now you squeeze slightly forward to MIP. It's very, very rare to find a natural bite that doesn't have some degree of slide from centric. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen one. We create them, but I don't think I've ever seen one, okay? So it makes you wonder, in the normal, is a very minimal slide from centric also normal? And it probably is. It probably is, because the teeth will also dictate how high the condyle is going to go. If the teeth are apart, the condyle can go all the way up to fully seated centric relation. If you have teeth present, as you bite down, you're going to decompress that slightly. You're going to pull the condyle slightly forward, and the amount you're pulling the condyle forward is equivalent to the amount of centric slide that you have. Does that make sense? So I'm just saying, in normal joints, you expect to see some centric slide. Okay, now what about abnormal joints? When you get to the abnormal joint, you're actually going to find a whole lot more going on. So in the abnormal joint, there's more posterior tooth interference, okay? And that posterior tooth interference is going to interfere as we're seating the condyle. So here I've dislocated the disc. I'll animate it again. Dislocating the disc, and as the disc dislocates, the condyle goes up. We're now premature here. Now this is going to create a much longer slide from centric. Okay, so now watch this animation. In the slide from centric, the condyle has to travel further forward to MIP. All right, so let's go back through it again. Normal disc, creating an abnormal disc and this class 2 shift. Now the slide to MIP is longer. So one way of reading a bite is to read the slide from centric. The longer the slide from centric, the more likely it's a TMJ problem. And in fact, when you get to the biggest ones of all, let's go ahead and model another one where I'm taking away bone. Now I've created much more dimensional loss in the TMJ, creating much more class 2 bite shifting. This is the longest slide of all. Okay, so you got it? In the static bite, fully seated condylar position, the slide from centric is an indicator of the amount of joint height loss. Anybody have any questions about that?